Holthus here, who's the CEO of the World Ocean Council, and the reason that, well, we're psyched for many reasons, but we don't get to interact with people who are really, in the mix with big private industry as much. The IEP program tends to be more your government, NGO crowd, and then when we do industry, it's more the entrepreneurship and the small startup space. We don't have as much experience, working with the big players, and Paul does. His organization has, everybody from the big oil and mining and shipping companies on down, and so it's just a really fascinating mix. And with this goal of kind of corporate ocean responsibility as the goal, the mission. And I think for all of you, I think a lot of people in this field, there's a general skepticism to big industry, right? And are they really doing the right thing, or is this are they blue washing? Would that be the term if it's a greenwashing? So I want you to bring that skeptical eye here, but also see what Paul is doing in terms of, I think, really pushing the frontiers here, and I'm sure he can address all the kind of the many layers of working with these big players in these really challenging issues. And so we're really looking forward to the talk, and thanks for coming.
One of the things that I encourage you to keep in mind is the opportunities for getting involved. And we started a couple of years ago to try and develop a sort of an internship and relationship. And I think there's some great opportunities to get students from the program or from the institution involved in working with the World Ocean Council directly, or with some of the companies that are involved in different projects and initiatives that we have. So keep that in mind.
If it's, we would prefer off the record stuff.
I gotta say this, my wife and daughter said, don't do it, don't do it. But does everybody know what today is? Are you aware?
September 9th.
Talk like a pirate day.
International Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Wow.
How did you know
How did you not know that?
Yes, that's what, and everybody else is in that
That's awesome.
So go to their website. It's I get no remuneration for that. It's just a fun thing to do. International Talk Like. Okay, so now so with my own background. So just a little bit about that, because it sort of sets the context. I was a student once, and it was really coming where I've ended up in this work I do now is coming from a whole lifetime of growing up around the ocean and being growing up in the Philippines and Hawaii and Southern California, and working in different parts of the world, a lot of the small island countries and places like that, and really coming at working on things because of a concern and a love for the ocean and concern about what's happening to the ocean. And having worked for the UN Environment Program, for the Nature Conservancy, and for other organizations like that, IUCN, realizing over the years that the only way we're going to be able to tackle and handle these global, these international ocean sustainable development and conservation challenges is by engaging the private sector. So for years, I was hearing, in working with these international organizations in the environment community and the science community, for years was hearing people say, oh, we need to get industry more involved, we need to get the business community to the table, and it just wasn't happening. And so I started doing that, in particular, when I was in the late 90s, I was deputy director of the IUCN Global Marine Program, just started reaching out to companies and industry groups, and meeting a lot of good people in good companies who cared about the ocean, they cared about their companies and their industry's ocean footprint, and were interested in figuring out how to be a part of solutions and to really deal with the challenges that they were facing. And so we started creating an informal network of companies and industry groups that eventually led me to this idea of really formalizing that and creating a business association, a leadership alliance, as we like to call it, around ocean and sustainable development. And that's what led to the World Ocean Council. Eventually, enough companies said, hey, Paul, you're onto something here. We don't get together. Particularly, one of the unique aspects of what we do is working across the sector. So bringing the shipping, fishing, oil and gas, and other industries together around a common theme and commitment and challenge of dealing with, as we call it, corporate ocean responsibility, as Jason mentioned. So let me spend 30 or 40 minutes giving you a sense of what we do and why we do it and how we do it, and then let's see where that leads us. So, okay, and I'll run through some of this stuff fairly quickly because it'll probably be familiar to you, and just to give you a bit of context, though, in terms of as I was saying, this very diverse, multiple-use ocean that we've got out there that a lot of people aren't familiar with, with these different sectors and new industries and new developments coming up, like carbon sequestration and offshore renewable energy and these sort of things. But even with the existing kinds of industry uses, we've got an expansion, an intensification, and the duration, the geographical extent of these different uses. The classic example being the Arctic, in which we now have shipping and oil and gas and other developments going on there that weren't before. But all across the globe, we've got this growing number of kinds of use, levels of activity, duration of activity, that's really creating a busy ocean out there. And the ocean economy, and I think all of you would know from the work here with the National Ocean Economy Program, really documenting the extent of the global ocean activities and their economic value and importance to communities and livelihoods is something that's really hitting the consciousness of people across the globe. And so we try and get the different industries thinking about their industry as a global industry and thinking about them as being a part of a mosaic or overlapping layers of a number of industries all working in the ocean and really creating a sense of an ocean business community. And it's not only those direct ocean users, the shipping and fishing and renewables and oil and gas, etc., but it's also this entire ecosystem of support industries. So each of those sectors has dozens of kinds of subsectors, so obviously shipping, shipbuilding, marine technology, marine fuels, all sorts of things. And you start looking at this as a complex ecosystem of companies surrounded by kind of enabling infrastructure of finance and insurance and the maritime legal industry. That's really a huge, complex web of the global ocean economy. And so we're working to get all of those different sectors and leadership companies thinking of themselves as a collective global ocean business community with a shared interest around dealing with the future of the ocean. So there's various numbers coming out and some great work coming out of this institution on what the ocean economy is and what it's worth. And so luckily Judy's not here because she would have much better information and probably challenge me on these numbers. But that's great to get that sort of information together. So what I'm going to do now is give you a sense of, without going into details, just look at the graphs as we just scroll through some of these key industries and the growth in these various industries and the complexity of these industries. And in fact, this is the latest numbers on the number of merchant vessels or something like 90,000, not because it's grown so much since 2010, but just better data is coming out. But the growth in shipping, cruise line tourism has been booming. The 2008 financial crisis was barely a blip in that industry. It's been growing at 20% a year in China, for example, the last 4 or 5 years, and it just doesn't slow down. Fisheries, as we know, are sort of plateaued because of the level of exploitation, but as for the maps, it's getting further afield. Fisheries is going on in deeper areas, so there's still growth and expansion of this, even if the catch levels have plateaued. And the importance, of course, in terms of livelihoods and economic value to communities and the incredibly diverse and complex small-scale fisheries of the world. So it's not something to be discounted just because catches have plateaued. On the other hand, aquaculture is growing, and when I speak to investment meetings, people are amazed to hear that aquaculture is has been the fastest growing food production system of any sort on this planet for the last 12 or 15 years, and creating job, investment, and food security opportunities that are really important as we look at a growing population on the planet, and a whole series of business development opportunities in terms of technology, the vessels involved, the processing of the fish, all sorts of things, and some international implications as aquaculture moves further and further offshore. Offshore oil and gas, not necessarily people's favorite subject, but it's there. It's important. It's up to 30% of oil and gas production at given times. It's plateaued a bit now due to the financial crisis, but we have to work with this industry to ensure it's sustainable and responsible, and take advantage of ways in which this industry can actually help us understand and better manage the ocean as it continues to move further offshore when the economic conditions are right. And so it's not something to be dismissed just because people don't like the idea of oil and gas or don't like the idea of offshore oil and gas. It's a reality of the ocean that we need to work with for the foreseeable future. On the other hand, the up-and-coming energy sources from the sea, offshore wind, has just been a rapidly growing and expanding area of activity, particularly in Europe, but now China is really moving ahead and increasingly in locations that haven't been involved. The U.S. finally is getting some offshore wind now in the east, and now the diagram on the far right of the floating offshore wind is going to be a huge part of the future of wind. That's really where the resources are, in places where it's too deep to do the monopiles or the other structures that have to actually be attached directly into the seabed. And actually there's a great company in the Bay Area. It's one of our member companies that's leading the way, one of the 3 companies leading the way on developing floating offshore wind. But creating conflicts with other sorts or running into conflicts with other sorts of offshore use too, which is part of the challenges we'll be talking about in a few minutes. Ocean energy, wave, tidal, thermal, and others, huge potential, but major technology development and implementation challenges that continue to keep this from really hitting the big time, but it's really getting there. In fact, Canada, where we'll be at our Sustainable Ocean Summit later this year, has done some great work on this that's really showing the way forward. The telecom industry, submarine cables, more than a million miles or kilometers of submarine cable, and this is growing incredibly. This is sort of old school industry. The submarine cable industry was the reason for the very first International Ocean Agreement. It was 1888. It was on managing and protecting submarine cables. And this, due to some of your neighbors here, Facebook and Google and others, the amount of cable is expanding, and the need for bandwidth, and look how complicated it is around Southeast Asia. The need to, for example, the first Arctic cable is starting to be laid in this year, the Alaska part of it, to connect Tokyo across to New York and London, so that there can be a few less milliseconds of transfer time for the financial markets. That's the world we live in. So anybody that's on your smartphone right now, you are using this marine infrastructure if you're sending emails. So it's ubiquitous. More mundane, but hugely important in terms of coastal ecosystems. The ports, the coastal infrastructure, the dredging. This is sort of the hardware of global trade. This infrastructure keeps our international, makes it possible for the international shipping industry that we all depend on for 90% of international trade and products to move along. We also have in some parts of the world the ocean as a source of fresh water. Up to 90% of fresh water in some of the Middle East countries comes from the ocean. And this, as we know here in California, an increasing part of the future of having water for growing populations. And then you get into challenges in terms of water quality and competition with other uses and competition with environmental issues. But this is the way of the ocean world. A new, not yet operational technology or industry, seabed mining. Again, controversial, but I encourage people to look at the studies and reports out there. Probably in the next 12 months, the very first deep sea mining operation will be underway. It's in national waters within the EEZ of Papua New Guinea and Holthus Minerals, one of our member companies. But the big future in this is in the international waters, where through the International Seabed Authority, these kind of claims, like you see there for the Central Pacific, have been staked out through a process and an institution set up under the law of the sea, and this will be an important part of a green economy moving forward. We need lots of copper at a minimum, but certainly a lot of other rare earths to have the modern and efficient electronics that we need. If you look at the numbers for what that booming renewable energy economy needs, there's a lot of copper needed. The best copper sources on land, let me put it the other way around, the best copper sources, accessible, economically viable copper sources in the ocean have 11 times the concentration, according to some studies, of the best remaining sources on land. And you can do the life cycle analysis that some people have done, and it actually may be less environmentally damaging to get that copper from the seabed than to continue mining from land at the scale that's needed to provide that material. So these are the trade-offs at a global scale that we as a society need to figure out for these important minerals and what it means for the future of the ocean. And the real future of the ocean is going to be interesting. There are people working on these sorts of, and some of these are for real, obviously like these, but the one, this vessel here is this permanent ship that's permanently circulating around the world with lots of wealthy people on it who have bought in condos essentially on a floating platform. Mm-hmm. And there are some interesting developments now about creating floating islands and new habitation at sea. And some people are really looking at international waters as the future of the new society. So you put all this together and you get this map that came out a few years ago from the group led by folks down at UC Santa Barbara. We've got even though it's a big global ocean, we've got impacts to some extent everywhere. And this is, I speak a lot at industry events, I show this map every time to help people understand in the business community, this is the world ocean view that the governments, the intergovernmental organizations, the science and environment community, this is what people are looking at. And so how are we going to manage these impacts on a global scale in relation to all of those different industries and societal demands and market demands and business opportunities? And so we work with the business community to understand these new risks and think of them as opportunities. These sorts of policy and international movements and developments listed here, I won't go through them one by one, but I think most of you are probably familiar with these sort of developments that are going back over the past couple of decades that I've been involved in this stuff. These are the sort of things that have been worked on in the various government and international arenas and being promoted by different groups and really codified to some extent in international agreements. And we'll talk about some of the governance and sustainable development goal efforts and marine planning. But again, what we work to do is to help leadership companies from different sectors think about these as not only challenges but opportunities, and the value of working with like-minded peers and other companies to deal with them. And so this is this ocean business community challenge that basically all of these companies, they need access and social license, whether it's shipping, all of those various industries I talked about, whether or not you're extracting something like a living marine resource or non-living resource or just moving across the top of the water, you need society and governments to give you the social and legal political license to do that in a global, three-dimensional, interconnected ocean that's complicated. And a lot of your impacts as Company X, you can work on, but you cannot solve them. And even if your entire sector worked on them and solved them, and say, for example, the shipping industry never again transmitted an invasive species by biofouling, the growth of organisms on the outside of a ship. There are other industries that are moving hardware and equipment in vessels around the world. You cannot solve that problem if you're the shipping industry, and you certainly cannot solve it if you're the biggest shipping company in the world or any other shipping company. It needs this collective multi-industry approach, and that's the sort of thing that we work on. So they're cross-cutting, they're cumulative. We need to harness the interest and efforts of these leadership companies across the sectors to deal with these problems. and do so by creating the business, working to identify and harness the business incentives, the business benefits of that kind of collaboration. So the problem had been that there wasn't a structure or process for these different companies and these different sectors to work together. The shipping folks, they don't talk to the fishing people. Why would they talk to them? They're doing different things. They have different mechanisms locally, regionally, nationally, internationally to work on their issues. And so this idea of collaborative ocean industry leadership effort, or leadership and collaboration, led, as I was saying, to the formation of the World Ocean Council. As we started bringing different companies together at the level of interest and energy and realization that there is common interest, common value in working together under this, as we call it, corporate ocean responsibility, and engaging. And so what we have now is a large global network of interested ocean industry stakeholders. And at the core of this is member companies that have come together to physically join in the World Ocean Council under this shared goal of, as you see up here, but as I was saying earlier, really ensuring that they're identifying and harnessing the business value, the business benefits to that collaboration. And it's, as I say, creating social license and access, the synergies and economies of scale that really create direct economic value in the collaboration. And it's cliche, but it's so true. This, for companies, stability and predictability in the operating environment is really essential to moving forward with a business. I'll just mention, while I think of it, in terms of the membership, we have just last week expanded to beyond corporate to company and business association and institutions, institutional members from the science and environment and academic community, which has included the Center for Blue Economy, to have now, based on demand or interest from around the world, people kind of want to come in at a supporter level as individuals from different companies or different points of the stakeholder community. So we've created an individual membership level. But secondly, most importantly here, we also have launched a Young Ocean Professionals program for people in the business community, but also in the master's or kind of graduate education community who see this broader work on corporate responsibility for the oceans as important, and or see themselves maybe moving into the ocean business community as part of their future, as a way to bring that collaboration to the young professionals and sort of graduate student level and create a network of individuals concerned about the ocean economy and sustainable development. And so that may be of interest to some of you. As I say, we've got a membership of companies, big and small, that have committed and continue to be involved in that. That membership continues to grow and evolve over time. We also have become well recognized as really the only global ocean industry organization, and certainly the only one working on sustainable development and science and stewardship, as we say. So these sorts of organizations I mentioned, for example, the International Seabed Authority, we're the only accredited business organization there. We have an MOU with the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, which is the UN Systems Ocean Science coordinating body, etc. And had played a major role in engaging the business community in the big UN Ocean Conference that took place in June this year. So to get to talk a bit about what the kinds of programs and work areas that we have, we've reorganized things a bit in the last year or so, partly driven by the development of the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, to focus on that as a kind of a organizing framework for what we do and how the future of the ocean is being considered over the next 15 years or so. A major effort that I'll talk about a bit more in terms of investment in the blue economy, the ocean economy. I mentioned the Young Ocean Professionals Network. We have what's really the only regular gathering now annually of the ocean business community around sustainable development, called the Sustainable Ocean Summit. And also we have been working in different regions to create business leadership amongst the different sectors, for example, in the Arctic, and have interest in that from other parts of the world. So if you think of that framework and then a kind of a matrix with these different program areas, and as I said, I'll get into some of these in a little bit more to give you a flavor of the real work that's going on. So ocean governance and policy and marine spatial planning, climate change, the various topics that you see there. And in fact, we've been having some good meetings this afternoon on this item regarding port and coastal infrastructure, resiliency and adaptation. The marine pollution issues, obviously, and I mentioned biofouling, for example, and invasive species, the whole issue of plastics and marine debris, and where the ocean industries fit into dealing with that. Marine biodiversity in general, in particular, the role of these various industries regarding impacts to marine biodiversity and how they relate to the establishment of marine protected areas, which kind of dovetails into the marine spatial planning discussion. A major program area I'll talk about in a bit more detail called Smart Ocean, Smart Industries, regarding the role of industry in helping us understand the oceans better. Clearly the whole food security concerns and articulated in various international developments and the role of ensuring that we've got sustainable, responsible fisheries and aquaculture in relation to, as I was saying earlier, all of those other uses going on in the ocean. And the port infrastructure and coastal infrastructure adaptation and resilience also plays a key role in the whole disaster risk reduction needs that we're seeing play out in the Caribbean and the southern U.S. right now. And then also, in terms of a low carbon energy future, the role of energy, renewable energy from the ocean, and what it takes to help ensure that that can move ahead as quickly as possible. And one, well, I'll continue on here and talk a little bit about some of these. In the governance area, we've done a lot of work to help ensure that the various industries are aware of what's going on a global governance and policy level, because so many of them are focused on their sectors. And so shipping, what should be International Maritime Organization, and other industries in other ways, or else in some cases there isn't a sort of a global ocean policy context. And what's really happening that's important is this, in particular, the top one there, this development of a new implementing agreement that's legally binding. And this, I really reinforce this with the industry folks when we talk about this. There is a new regulation coming in for the ocean that's going to affect the future of who gets to do what and how in terms of commercial activities in the ocean. So it's an amendment essentially to the law of the sea that is that's looking at environmental impact assessment requirements. It's looking at area-based management tools such as marine protected areas for the ocean. So and this is for the high seas, so the areas, the A, B, and J, the areas beyond national jurisdiction. And so this is, what is it, 46% of the planet, something like that, is the areas beyond national jurisdiction. Huge part, almost half of the planet. All of those industries that operate out there, there's a new set of rules coming to town, and they have largely not been at the table, except for us, and often me personally, in the room at the UN as this text is being negotiated. It's just not on the radar screen. And while it might be simpler, and a lot of my colleagues in the environment community are happy that industry's not there, it's a lot better to have a messy multi-stakeholder process up front, rather than have stakeholders who aren't at the table show up later and say, well, wait a minute, we weren't part of this, we don't agree. And so in any kind of lawmaking and regulation making, you really want the key people at the table, even though it complicates things, because it's better than having them challenge things later. And even the most well-intentioned companies, if they're not involved in discussions, may feel obliged or may need to challenge things. And so we're really working to help bring the industry to the table in a constructive, progressive kind of way in that process. So this is a bit more detail on that. So marine protected areas, EIA, area-based management, and marine genetic resources. These are very germane business topics that are being developed in this new regulation at the UN. So there's been 2 years of discussions, and then it's been proposed now to open a formal negotiating process to essentially a new treaty component to the law of the sea on this. There's also been a process, and it's the UN process, it has to have an acronym. So this is the EPSA process, ecologically and biologically significant areas, that's been pursued through the Convention on Biological Diversity. And this is just to help make the point when I talk to the industry folks about this has been going on without anybody there until we started showing up. Again, an important development of identifying important parts of the ocean, and this is a map from already a couple of years ago. These huge dark blue areas are portions that have now been, of the ocean, that have now been officially registered in this UN process as important ocean areas. And I show this to industry folks, and they just stop and their mouth opens and go, what do you mean? What's going to happen to these areas? We run a lot of ships through here. We do some fishing here. I said, well, this is what's going on. And you need to understand that this isn't setting management for these. This is the global environment and science community saying these are important parts of the ocean for a variety of reasons, through a very well-developed set of criteria and a very long and well-developed process that industry has not been involved in, but needs to be as this moves, and with this part I was just talking about, the new treaty amendment to the law of the sea creates the enabling legislation in effect for them working with these areas and turning them into developing management. Even without that enabling legislation, areas like the Sargasso Sea that block up there on the right has important ecological attributes, and governments got together. And as I say to shipping folks and others, I say, governance happens. You may not be paying attention to this, but governments and other stakeholders are starting to draw the lines, put up the fences on the ocean prairie, and say this is how we're going to run this part of the ocean. And so this came out a few years ago for a group of governments, and now a few more joining in, saying the Sargasso Sea is important, and we're going to start managing it as an ecosystem-based approach. And unfortunately, they went without engaging, as we've been encouraging them, engaging shipping and fishing and other industries who they felt were the source of the problem. There was an opportunity missed to engage those industries and say, let's work together on this. Instead, they came out with this declaration, and of course, the shipping industry and others, really good companies, said, what the heck? Nobody talked to us about this. We would have been happy to discuss our industry operations in the Sargasso Sea. Is there good science? Do we actually understand the risk and impacts as a partnership? And so this is kind of a way not to go forward with ocean governance by having these kind of unilateral declarations about what's going to happen. It's a three-dimensional shared ecosystem, particularly in international waters, and we, as I said at the beginning, we cannot achieve the healthy, productive, managed future of the ocean without engaging the private sector that's out there doing business. 4 things that we all benefit from, such as shipping that brings us cheap toothbrushes from China or whatever. That's how we all live. We need to take that into account. We cannot pretend that's not happening out there. So we're working in various ways, as I say, to engage and inform industry with these policy developments. Similarly, with marine spatial planning or ocean zoning, we're working to get industry informed and involved as possible as this develops in different parts of the world. A lot going on in the U.S. and in Europe, but really it's a whole process that's spreading around the world to really determine what sorts of uses can take place or non-uses, ideally as a multiple use, a multiple stakeholder kind of planning and development. Business, again, has largely been left out of the process. This is improving in different parts of the world, and there's a need to ensure that we've got the kinds of industries involved that are actually doing stuff in these areas that are for which management plans are being developed. And maybe some of you have seen this, the Irish Sea. And when you start putting together the picture of what's going on, it gets to be a pretty busy ocean in nearshore waters. And parts of the California coast will probably look like this. I don't know if you've shown this in other.
No, I haven't shown that.
Okay, well, let's look at it again. I like watching it.
Yeah, it's impressive.
There we go. And so we need more of this kind of mapping. So the information, the data, really helps paint the picture, and you cannot do zoning without having this kind of information put together. And think about, and as you see, there's culture conservation. It's also the sort of the non-use, so there's the non-industrial use aspects of that are brought in there. But that's really driving this need for what we do on marine spatial planning to make sure the industry understands what's going on and gets to the table with their data, their information, their scenarios for future use, so that this can really be a multiple use planning, just like we do on land. And you wouldn't be, you wouldn't plan for the San Francisco, the Bay Area watershed without thinking about all the different industries and the infrastructure and so on. It's the same thing in the ocean. And so really having a partnership and a collaborative approach. Also big in the sort of policy and international arena are the Sustainable Development Goals, which I hope you have all heard about. They cover a whole range of topics, and this sets the 15-year sort of global agenda, replacing the Millennium Development Goals that were around from 2000 to 2015. And number 14 is about the ocean. It's inappropriately called the short term is life below water. It's much more about all kinds of needs and uses and challenges for the ocean. And so we've been working to help inform and educate the ocean business community about the different sustainable development goals, and the ones that are highlighted have a particular, more direct sort of operational relationship or business relationship to the private sector in terms of energy and water and food security, for example, infrastructure, climate change, and in particular, as I say, SDG 14 on the ocean. And the full title on the right there in blue is really, it's not just about life below water, it's about conserve and sustainably use the oceans. And that's really the real work there in terms of sustainable development. So we've been helping the business community, and there's a whole movement to get business in general involved in this that's moving along fairly well amongst major companies in sort of big visible industries, but we're working to help communicate the SDGs to the ocean business community and understand where they can be getting involved, what sort of things they can do to help show compliance with or implementation of the SDGs in their business plans and achieving these kind of benefits by incorporating them, both in terms of the ocean business community as a whole and how individual companies, as I say, can get involved. There are companies that get it, but they have difficulties sort of relating to this international broad brush sort of policy stuff. And I have almost literally the following statements to me from, say, the head of sustainability for a major shipping company saying, okay, Paul, I get it, I understand the SDGs and the importance. What do I tell my CEO? How do we operationalize this? What does this mean for me, for us as a major shipping company? And that's the sort of work we do, is to help serve as that bridge and translate this sort of stuff into what an individual company can do. Let me keep moving on here. I mentioned under this ocean knowledge sort of category what we call the Smart Ocean Smart Industries Program. And this is working to create and accelerate an involvement of industry in helping us better document and understand the ocean, so that companies can be involved in data collection and sharing, either by hosting instruments that collect data, not just about the ocean, but also the weather and atmosphere in that 71% of the planet that's ocean, because they are out there, as I'll mention in a few minutes, so that we can better understand and model and forecast ocean conditions, And so our work is to expand the number of vessels and platforms that collect data and share data, and improve the ways in which that data can move to the national and international science community. And when we see what's happening the last few weeks in the Caribbean, that's really the poster child of this. So we need, collectively as society, we need to understand better how the ocean is driving these extreme weather events, as well as the longer term patterns of climate change and sea level rise. And there's a real virtuous cycle on this, in that the more and better data that comes from all of these industry vessels and platforms, that goes to the modelers and the forecasters, that comes back to those companies, as well as through public databases, as well as to all the scientists and government agencies and others. The better we can improve that data flow and its use, it's really a win-win. And so we get better, and there's a lot of business opportunities there for those that then can do the predicting and the modeling on a commercial basis, but also the government agencies. And the win-win is that communities like those in the Caribbean that are better able to be warned of the intensity and track of a hurricane. That's what we've all been watching the last few weeks. You think about that from a business perspective, any of those companies that have oil platforms or ships in the Gulf of Mexico, if you know that the storm is going this way instead of this way, and you can keep that ship out of harm's way, or you can shut down that oil rig for a day less than it needs to be, that's a direct business benefit. And at the very bottom line, you save lives. And there's nothing more important to any of us in a community in the Caribbean or in a company, saving lives, saving infrastructure, and saving capital and taxpayer dollars and investor dollars. And so this is a real partnership approach to this, and creating a system that really harnesses these drivers and gets industry more involved in this data collection. There's a lot of programs out there, but what we're being asked to do is create a more comprehensive platform to do the kind of matchmaking between the industry infrastructure opportunities and the scientific community needs for more data. So the basis for this is, and the term is often ships of opportunity, and so we've kind of turned that on our head to say, okay, look how many opportunities of ships there are out there. And as I said earlier, this number is actually really closer to 90,000 in the different vessels, and you can see the different places in the map that the shipping industry is going. And there's all of these other kinds of infrastructure out there, as per my earlier overview of the ocean economy, such as 1 million kilometers of cable, thousands of oil platforms, estimates of 3 million fishing boats out there, etc. And so really creating this more comprehensive approach to engaging all these industries and essentially doing a brokering or matchmaking. And we're getting the science community to say, we need this kind of data in these parts of the world that would really help us better understand the ocean in terms of climate change. So ocean acidity data, there's almost none out there in the open ocean, except from the research vessels, of which there's maybe 20 or 30. If we can get even 1% of those 80 to 90,000 merchant vessels collecting ocean acidity data, we can really help deal with the modeling needs and monitoring of ocean acidification that the science community and governments are saying is so critical to understanding that problem. And much more germane stuff, such as filling in the map more completely on temperature and salinity, the real core basic ocean data, but that drives a lot of the climate modeling, the circulation modeling, etc. So this is the sort of work we're doing in creating this Smart Ocean, Smart Industries program and focusing on priorities, as I say, as acidification, high priority regions such as the Arctic. We've just completed, just to make this very real, an example, for the first time ever, a commercial ship, a commercial cruise ship, went through the Northwest Passage. So from Alaska across the top of Canada through to eastern Canada, because of the low ice levels. So we can debate about climate change and the change in the Arctic, but the reality is there's less ice, and so people are doing things up there that they didn't used to. Those ships are moving through there. Last year, I assumed somebody was doing it, but nobody was, and that's why we, the World Ocean Council, does our job. And so this year, we made sure that that cruise ship was collecting data that can be shared with the international science community as they move through that part of the world that's never had a commercial cruise go through it. And so those are the kind of opportunities of engaging the business community that we work to create in this voluntary observation work. Lastly, let me just mention a little bit about some really exciting, important developments from the last few years. Over the years, we've been engaging the finance and investment community about the ocean economy, sustainability, and the opportunities to really get more mainstream investment involved in being a part of the future of the ocean. And work here, the National Ocean Economy Program, these sort of things have really helped bring the size and growth and diversity and complexity of the ocean economy more into the mainstream, which is great. And what we're doing is saying to the investment community, hey, look at how important this economy is, how much it's growing. You guys ought to think about being a part of this, but particularly then thinking about what are the sustainability opportunities. So getting the investment community linked in with these leadership companies that are working through the World Ocean Council to be responsible, sustainable operators in the ocean. And also, and there's a lot of these companies in this corner of California, the startups, the innovators, the blue tech companies that are providing technology and services and solutions to some of those environment and sustainability challenges. And so we've had a variety of things in particular that have promoted this, in particular engaging through the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute, which is basically the association of the big pension funds, CalPERS from California, and the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, and Saudi Arabia and others. And in fact, we hope to do this next year because they've been so interested. I've spoken at that event a couple of times over the last few years. It was just this eye-opener for them. The stuff I was showing you earlier, those are the same slides I show these investment people. They had no idea about the growth of the cruise tourism industry, the growth of aquaculture. And so they've asked us to do next year an ocean day, out on an ocean day, because they're gathering up these big pension funds to really help them get into more detail. And things like infrastructure development for resilient ports and these sort of opportunities are what they're interested in. And so we're undertaking these sort of things to help the investment community understand the issues, the opportunities, and where are the good investment opportunities. You know, which companies are providing a good solution to, just to build on one of the examples I gave earlier, biofouling and the spread of invasive species. California, interestingly, along with Australia and New Zealand, are leading the way in new regulation of what needs to be managed when ships come in and out of the ports. It's a good thing and a bad thing. A good thing because it needs to be tackled. Less good in that it's a global problem and needs a global solution. So there's difficulties when you have these piecemeal legislative solutions to these interconnected ocean issues. But that forces the situation, and so that's really creating a need to deal with it at the UN level. In the meantime, there's business opportunities. So companies are developing ways to, just one aspect of it is how you need to now clean a ship more often and have documentation of how you cleaned it and what was found and so on. And so companies are inventing ways to more, like robotics, to clean the side of the ship much more efficiently because time in port is money spent for a shipping company. So you need to clean it quickly, efficiently, in a way that can be well documented. Companies are emerging to produce that technology, but the investment community then, they say, oh yeah, okay, we get it, which is a good company. And so they need someone to provide third-party information and analysis of the different service providers, technology providers, so that you bring forward the cream of the crop to the investment community to think about helping accelerate the uptake on these companies. So there's different areas that are really driving these big picture global drivers that the investment community is already sort of aware of, these sorts of things. And so taking those drivers and turn them into particular investment focused information analysis and brokering, deal making along these sort of things. So talking about energy and low carbon energy, a lot of companies, they get it, renewables, they get it. What's the ocean piece of that? And so they help them understand that the real big opportunity is floating offshore wind. What are the barriers to that? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? Which are the good companies? That's the sort of stuff they want to know. And the sooner we can get that kind of analysis and information in front of investment companies, the sooner we can get that money flowing to the good companies so that we can move forward more quickly with low carbon energy from the ocean. And so other examples here that are that sort of logic chain that we're working on. So just to end, I will just a couple of last slides here that are pretty dense in text here, but just to give you a sense of why, I talked about the challenge and the need for a structure and process to engage a multi-industry global approach to dealing with the oceans and sustainable development. And what we're finding with, that it's actually not that self-evident to people, particularly in the international community, the role of intermediary organizations, which is how I would characterize themselves. And there are others that have evolved over the years, come into being, different organizations that focus on business and sustainable development. And they play a great role, and so we're the ocean piece of that. And that the business community, although there are great companies and good people in those companies that want to deal with these issues, it's not going to happen on its own. They need incentives, they need someone to, kind of like I was saying with the investment community, they need the information, they need someone to foster and facilitate their involvement, because it's just not part of what's most people's day job in a company. So we need to help them engage, and so that's part of the take-home message here is that you need these third-party industry organizations to really organize the information, identify the issues, and get that in front of companies and industry groups to really help them say, oh yeah, okay, we know we need to be doing something on this, but what exactly should we be doing? And that's, as I was saying with the Sustainable Development Goal example of the shipping company. What do we need to do? What exactly are the sustainable development targets for our individual company? And that's the kind of information that we work to provide so that we can get this sort of long-term engagement and development of the networks, and people don't want to feel like they are the only company working on these things and creating it. So we work to create a bit of a critical mass around the issues and the opportunities, and really a sense of activity through partnerships in specific projects, getting their input into how to develop and implement those projects and programs, and really particularly to ensure that there's continuity in this work. And so there's a lot of NGO efforts and foundation efforts and even government efforts that with the funding dries up and then things stop. And even at the level of governments, as with we can see in the current administration in the US, a lot of great initiatives that have started in previous administrations, the government's changed, the interests changed, the policies changed. And so harnessing the role of the business community, as I said, I'm a lifelong, from when I was this big, ocean guy. I love the ocean, and I care about the future of the ocean. I really reoriented my entire career and commitment of my professional effort to ensuring that the business community is a part of ensuring we've got a healthy, sustainable ocean, because I think that's where the continuity of commitment and effort will be to really make a difference in the long term. And so this is what we do to create that continuity through our work at the World Ocean Council. So that's probably way more than you ever wanted to know about what we do, but this is probably the only time you'll get it from me. So thanks for listening, and I'll stop there.
Paul, maybe I can start the questions off here. You make a really persuasive case for kind of the need for proactive business engagement in these issues, but to kind of play devil's advocate again here, you can tell I want to get the skepticism card out of the way, is, a lot of people in environment or government might say, as soon as you get industry in, their incentive is this kind of regulatory capture to water things down, and so, we need external people who understand business, but then to really get them to do the right thing. And you mentioned this notion of them being engaged, watching me lead to be more constructive, right? That if they're in, you can get your objectives met, but in a more constructive way and with less maybe legal wrangling or whatever. Can you give some examples of that where industry was brought in earlier in the process and it facilitated the right outcome in a more effective way, or how they play a constructive role in the outcome?
Okay, so the interpreters asked me to repeat questions so that to the microphone.
Sorry, that's a long question.
And so that was a really long, hard one, so I won't be able to repeat it.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, sorry, interpreters, that's my fault.
Didn't we have a deal about no hard questions?
Sorry.
So let me think about that. So the question was, are there examples of where industry's gotten involved early on and it's resulted in a constructive process and engagement and a better outcome? Let me think about that. So, yeah, let's take the issue of balanced water management. So the other big invasive species issue with ocean industries, especially the big shipping industry, is the transfer of invasives through ballast water management. And I was involved in it from the other side, well, not the other side, I was involved in it from IUCN back in the late 90s. And when the science was really becoming clear that this was a big, global, significant issue, and good science and some risk assessment analysis and I was involved directly in this and was coming out and brought to the International Maritime Organization, which is the global shipping industry regulatory body. And the shipping industry, after a couple of years of listening and saying, wow, this is complicated, and saying, okay, the science was clear, and bringing that message forward with, as I said, good science through governments into the appropriate agreed intergovernmental process, there is, and a good colleague and one of our members, the International Chamber of Shipping, Peter Hinchliff, the head of the executive secretary, he will say there is good alignment on this. The industry came on board. If they had not, if this was a push from a group of NGOs, it would not have gone, and it kind of went that way originally, and basically people said, you got to bring it to the table at the IMO. It's going to take a lot longer, and it did. It took many years to develop that, as you may know, the Ballast Water Management Convention, a big treaty. The governments all signed on. The IMO is an especially good UN organization because of that interaction between science, industry, governments, and the environment community and others. And it took quite a while to negotiate it, but a good treaty came out of that everyone said, okay, this is the way forward. Unfortunately, it got stalled by governments, taking 10 years to get enough signatures on it to formally ratify it, but that just happened a couple of weeks ago. So.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering, under the new law of the sea that's coming out, if anybody's regulating the use of bunker fuel by the shipping industry.
So, just to clarify, it's not a new law, obviously, it's a new amendment. This will be the third amendment, essentially, agreement, as they call it, under the law of the sea. So the question is, through the efforts regarding the law of the sea, is there any regulation of bunker fuel? So, bunker fuel, for those of you that don't know, is the fuel that's used on the main, fuel, heavy fuel oil, essentially, used in the shipping industry, in the gradations of fuel from the very good, high quality sort of aviation fuel. At the bottom of the barrel, almost literally, is this heavy fuel oil, or bunker fuel, that's used in the main shipping industry. And it's, of all of those fuels, it's the most dirty and polluting, there's no doubt about it, but it's also the cheapest and widely available and very stable and easy to move, and the whole industry is based on that after it moved from coal. This is the alternative. There are, relating back to the IMO again, there have been some very good, serious, and great alignments. Another good example of the industry understanding the pollution impacts of bunker fuel. And there's a series of regulations that have ratcheting down the percentage, particularly of sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxides, SOx and NOx, as they're called, in the use of fuel. And so that's not through this law of the sea process, it's really been through this shipping industry IMO process. And it's very serious, regular ratcheting down. Different parts of the world have had heavy fuel oils or bunker fuel banned essentially around the Antarctic. It's effectively going to be not possible to use heavy fuel oil in the Arctic in the near future as part of the new polar code that's come out to the IMO. And there's also been a series of emission control areas, ECAs, that have been, the potential to create those has been set up through the IMO and different governments, including the entire continental US now, the Baltic Sea, a number of other areas are ECAs, emission control areas, where there's even tighter regulation over the use of fuel in ships so that they have to use the low sulfur and the low nitrous oxide producing fuels. So there's a lot going on in that area, and it's a serious alignment again of the environmental issue, good science, good risk assessment, and the industry and good intergovernmental process saying, okay, this is what we need to do. You know, it's not saying it's all, you know, the bed of roses, but people are working through it, and there's huge, and this will apply to the shipping industry moving to low greenhouse gas emission producing fuels in the future. This is requiring transformation of the fuel logistics supply chain on a global scale. It's not something that happens easily, but there's a major transformation to LNG fuel now that's rapidly moving forward as an interim step to the really exciting stuff going on in the shipping industry is, and I've just seen some documents on this in the last week, is zero emission ships. People are looking at by 2030 having autonomous zero atmospheric emission ships. And this is, you know, exciting stuff, great business opportunities, technology development, etc.
Thank you.
So as part of the council, I saw you put the membership list up there for a second, but I don't know, do you guys have any council members that are based on land like agriculture, wastewater management that can have an adverse effect on the ocean, but they're not necessarily reliant on it in their operations? Or have you guys reached out to those kinds of companies?
So the question is whether we have members or are reaching out to the land-based industries and companies that create ocean pollution. So the focus to date for the World Ocean Council has been on the sea-based industries operating in the ocean. But this year, we've started developing a source-to-sea sort of initiative because I was seeing, with all the increasing push over the last few years about the state of the ocean, so much information and concern about the land-based sources, which are a huge part of, as you say, the pollution problems and the effects on the ocean. And my own work in years gone by at UNEP and elsewhere was involved in those sort of things. And so I was, as we developed the network of the World Ocean Council, I was getting to know people like the fertilizer industry and the wastewater management industry and these other land-based industries, and I was feeding them information, feeding them in a good sense. I said, look, you guys, you're facing the land. Behind you in the ocean, downstream, the environment and government, intergovernmental community, the scientists, they are literally identifying on infographics the fertilizer and agriculture industry with skull and crossbones. And I bring that up in celebration of the International Talk Like a Pirate Day. What's a pirate's favorite fast food chain?
Oh, Pirates favorite.
Arby's. But this is really serious. So we've started this source to sea sort of initiative to say, you guys, let's work together. I mean, you, particularly the agriculture, the fertilizer, the farming industries, and in the middle is kind of the wastewater management, the freshwater sort of management private sector, and say, let's really get together and work on this, because we're seeing the downstream effects here. We know that community well. You guys don't, in terms of the marine science and environment community, and really figure out how to work on this together and help you land-based industries that are creating marine problems really engage on this on a global scale. So there's some really interesting developments, particularly in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN Ocean Conferences here, really forced that issue as a big deal that people need to start paying attention to. So I'd say watch that space. We're hoping to try and help do our part. Yep.
Oh, the question I had related back to the new amendment law, so the law of open seas basically.
Mhm.
I'm kind of unfamiliar with ocean policy, but I understand that it's very difficult to implement, to monitor what happens in the high seas. And I was just curious with respect to deep sea mining and potential new businesses that could rise up in the open seas, what sort of monitoring and auditing of that might look like in the future, and how the Ocean Council would be involved in that.
So the question was, particularly as new industries start to undertake activities in the ocean, how their activities and effects are going to be monitored or
And implement in the high seas. Yeah.
in the high sea, yeah. Well, so the fundamental situation is, as I say, that really the rationale behind what we do is the fact that if we don't have industries themselves monitoring and reporting, we're never going to know what's going on. Because we're never going to have a police, resource person, agency person on every ship, on every fishing boat, on every oil platform, etc. And so this is the big challenge of the ocean in general. How do we monitor and manage and enforce what's going on out there? There's a lot of good work that's gone on to create the kinds of reporting and tracking of what different industries do. I mean, shipping is furthest along in that. Fisheries, they have a lot of the bigger sectors in fisheries, such as tuna, and where there's regional fishery management organizations, they have observers on board. So they actually have that kind of eyes on the fishery, and not a fun job if you're looking to go to sea and do something, to be the only kind of watchdog on a fishing boat full of people who want to catch as much fish as fast as they can. But that's the level at which it's being implemented to some. In some industries, it's just a human being there really watching what's going on. Technology is really advancing how we do that. There are now technology being developed with cameras and the metrics and all the digitalization, that cameras are actually monitoring fishing nets as they come up, and they can measure the fish as it's coming on board and this sort of stuff. So it's really automating that kind of monitoring. A lot of in the more in the shipping industry side of things, a lot has to do with sort of logbooks and reporting, and it's actually been pretty good the way in which, and if you track shipping industry news, people get caught. The Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard, the shipping industry loves them and hates them. They're there to protect and save, lives and so on. But they're checking those environmental logbooks regularly, and people get caught and fined and significantly impacted in their reputation and so on by that kind of shore-based monitoring. So an important piece of that relates to the law of the sea is called port state control and flag state control. So port state control means that the port where a ship comes ashore, and there's just been a major agreement finally come into force regarding the fishing industry. When fish gets landed at that port, wherever that ship is from, wherever they've been fishing, that country can now control what's happened. If there's evidence that there's been illegal fishing of any sort, they can now be hit by that country where they've landed the catch, which didn't used to be the case. Flag state control means the country where the vessel is registered. It comes under the laws of that country. There's still this fundamental challenge that you point out. How do we know what's going on out at sea, like with this new industry, seabed mining? And we really need, this is why this partnership and constructive relationship is so important. We need to have as tight a regulatory process as possible, the documentation, the verification, but and there can be independent studies and spot checks and so on, but we really need companies, and there's a variety of ways through verification and using the technology to try and minimize the potential for cheating and trying to go around the rules. But it really is about a willingness and a commitment by companies to do the right thing. And it's going to be a constant challenge and an evolving set of tools and technologies that help us deal with that. And that's what we like to do, and why we like to characterize what we're doing as a leadership alliance, getting companies together to help that want to be up here, and the regulation may be here. So this is kind of the baseline, and so there's all these substandard companies. The enemy of a good company is a bad company. And so this is what's creating the disconnect, and the whole sector gets pilloried when there's an oil spill or an escape from an aquaculture farm. So if they can help push the regulations up because they already aspire to be and have the opportunity to be up here, and that makes it harder for the substandard companies to keep in business, that's the kind of dynamic that good companies want, and that's what we're trying to facilitate and encourage.
Just because we're kind of running low on time here, what I'd like to do is reserve a few minutes here if you want to come up and introduce yourself and maybe ask Paul another question or two, and we got to get out of here in about maybe 15 minutes. So let's give him another round of applause.